Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco socialist program that Angela Walker, my running mate, and I ran on in 2020. So, this, I think, has been a pretty good week for Jill Stein's campaign because the Democrats are attacking her. They're giving her a platform. And after AOC, did that tweet, and it's I think the back and forth is still going on. I wrote an article, and it was titled "AOC boosts Jill Stein by attacking her." And I think, and I point out how it looks like the Democrats are going to stop ignoring her and start attacking her, which is good for the Greens because being ignored is worse than being attacked and having a platform to respond. And so that got things going last week, and we'll put that article link in the chat. And then this week, Charlemagne the God, the Breakfast Club, had Jill Stein and Butch Ware on, and it was a debate. They had a woman named Angela Rye, who's a pro-democratic, pro-Harris party or person, and she asked some questions and questioned the legitimacy of the Stein campaign, but Jill and Butch had an opportunity to respond. And judging from the social media commentary, a lot of people didn't like the way that the Breakfast Club kind of attacked these candidates. Not like they have, they had Joe Biden on in 2020. And afterwards, Charlemagne said, he didn't answer my questions. And so Angela and I tried to get on in 2020, and he wouldn't even acknowledge our request. So we wrote an open letter to him, and we'll put that chat in that link in the chat. And we said, well, since Joe Biden won't answer your questions, we will. And we explained our reparations program. That was one of Charlemagne's questions. Another was on legalizing marijuana. We answered that. And the other question was, would he appoint a black woman to run with him for vice president? And he didn't commit to that. And so we pointed out, oh, by the way, Angela is a black woman. So you can take a look at that. I think what's changed since 2020 is, we were attacked by the, progressives in the Democratic Party, socialists who think we got to vote defensively to stop Trump and attack me for running. And so there were open letters from leftist groups and, a group of environmentalists who were really kind of over the hill environmentalists. And I was able to write responses to them, but that was, just online. I think the difference this year is there's a national issue where it's real clear where the Greens stand as opposed to the Democrats and Republicans, and that's Gaza. And so that's got a lot of attention, and I think that is going to help the Green Party campaign this time. But while there was a lot of social media, support for Jill and criticism of the way the Breakfast Club handled that interview, you got to remember that there are 4 to 5.5 million, depending on the source, people who are regular listeners to that. It goes out on over 40 radio stations around the country. And regular listeners, who tend to be black working class folks who feel pretty sympathetic to Kamala Harris, may have taken it differently than what you might be reading on the social media. So I wouldn't overestimate how big an audience that reached that is deciding they're going for Jill Stein, but we'll see. The polls still show her, at 1%. Sometimes she doesn't show up at 1%. One poll had her at 2%, and I'm talking about the last month. So, that's what we're talking about. But that could be the margin of difference in some of these swing states. So we got to think about what that means if it is for us going forward. And we got a neo-fascist Trump regime coming in. And I'll say a few more words about that later. But, it seems like a long time ago now because so much has happened. But we had the Harris-Trump debate on Tuesday night. And, from my viewpoint, Harris just slapped Trump around. She baited him with pointed barbs, like foreign leaders are laughing at him. His former military leaders call him a disgrace. People leave his rallies early out of boredom. And he was fired by 81 million people in 2020. I think those were all good barbs She showed an ability that nobody else has in taking Trump on. And every time she put bait out, she hooked him. And he ended up looking defensive, self-absorbed, full of bombastic, ignorant lies. And it took him off his own message. And by contrast, she looked confident in her body language from first going up and shaking his hand. She was smiling. She had these quizzical looks as Trump was talking nonsense. And when she did speak, it was with clarity and conviction in her statements. And she constantly triggered him with those barbs, and he was rattled. I mean, he was glowering. He was shouting louder and louder as the debate went on. I think he knew he was losing. He just looked out of his depth, petty, gloomy, mean-spirited, self-absorbed, and just ignorant compared to Harris, who focused on the bigger picture. She had a future-focused optimism and, commanded the issues to the extent she got into them. And a lot of people saw this. 70 million people tuned in, and that's about 20 million more than saw the Trump-Biden debate in late June. And the initial polling shows Harris is getting about a 1 to 2 point bump in the polls. So she was 3 or 4%. Now she's 4 or 5% ahead. We'll see. We'll have to see if that's, she's reached her ceiling, because it's not moving a lot. And if you watch the debate, I mean, from my point of view, how could you think of voting for Harris? So I think she hit her themes well. Like, we're not going back, we're turning the page, we're going forward. That, is a good way to frame what the contrast is with Trump. And I think she killed Trump on two issues that are concerned and can reach that small sliver of undecided votes in the suburbs, especially women. And I think she killed him with a heartfelt defense of abortion. And she also killed him by contrasting her leadership, which she described as unifying people to lift everyone up, in contrast to Trump's style, where he's always punching down at vulnerable people and blaming other folks for his failures. So I think Harris won it on style for sure. And I think she connected emotionally with a lot of people, especially undecideds. But she was weak on policy specifics, which some of the undecideds need to hear. And what she did say was just terrible. I mean, it was terrible. I think Jeffrey Sinclair summarized it well in Counterpunch. He said, with Harris, it sounds like we will get Cheney's foreign policy, AIPAC's Middle East policy, Goldman Sachs' economic policy, and Exxon's climate policy. And it did. And one could add, when we get to immigration policies, she sounded like she was a Republican, with her full-throated endorsement of that terrible immigration bill, where Biden conceded so much ground to the Republicans. On foreign policy, John Pfeffer of Foreign Policy in Focus, I think, put it truthfully when he said, quote, neither side offered a substantial reworking of U.S. foreign policy, since one side believes in America first, and the other in America as first among equals. They're both for the U.S. being the big dog on the world stage and, an imperialist foreign policy. Harris's position on genocide is on genocide, I was going to say on Gaza, is pro-genocide, because she won't condition arms to Israel on getting a ceasefire or prisoner exchange and a process toward a political solution. And she did express her concern for the deaths of innocent Palestinians, but that rings hollow when she's not willing to say Israel's not getting any more arms from us until they stop, the genocide and begin moving toward political solutions. And her answers on climate were terrible. It was a question on climate, and she said, I'm for fracking, and we produce more oil and gas than ever before. That's an answer to the climate crisis question. I mean, that's as bad as Sarah Palin's drill, baby, drill. Her economic policy proposals, she tried to be a little bit populist, but they were pretty modest and wonky, all about tax cuts and tax credits. Not clear, bold, populist economic policies like Medicare for all, or raising the minimum wage, or increasing the Social Security benefit. These have wide support and would get her a lot of votes. Trump is at least clear when he talks about tariffs, even if his proposals are dumber than dirt. And I'm afraid Harris risks losing this election the same way Hillary Clinton did, by not giving working class and middle class people, especially in those, Rust Belt, red, what they call it, the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, without giving them a populist economic message. Clinton did have reams of detailed policy papers, but not a populist message and sensibility. And Trump did, and fooled a lot of people. And Harris doesn't have the detailed policies or that populist sensibility. She's trying. I think Tim Walz conveys it better, but she's got a lot to do, particularly in those Rust Belt states. And that's where she could lose the election. And when I say she loses the election, I think it's pretty clear she's going to win a popular vote. It's the Electoral College. And abolishing the anti-majoritarian Electoral College is another issue that the Democrats should be raising. They should have been raising it for the last 20 years, or 24 years. It's the only time Republicans first got elected in the 21st century was when they lost the popular vote, but the Electoral College installed them. In fact, the Republicans have lost every popular vote for president since 1988, except one. That was 2004, Bush Jr., and he was an incumbent in the post 9/11, war frenzy. So it's really hard for the Republicans are not going to win the popular vote, but the Electoral College, could put them in again. And, this would be a popular issue for the Republicans. The Greens, Jill Stein, she mentioned it on Charlemagne the God, and her inquisitor, Angela Rye, the Democratic Party person, had to agree. 65% of Americans, according to the Pew polls, want to get rid of the Electoral College and go to a popular vote for president. And Pew has been tracking this since the 2000 election, when the Supreme Court installed George W. Bush. And it's always been high. I think it started at 61%. Now it's 65%. It's been popular a long time. But the Democrats have not done anything to replace the Electoral College with a popular vote, let alone what we advocate, a ranked choice popular vote, which would eliminate the spoiler problem posed by the Green Party, which the Democrats seem to be so worried about. I remember Hillary Clinton, right after that 2000 election, she was elected to the Senate. And her first news conference, about 90 miles from here, south of here in Binghamton, New York, she said she was going to introduce legislation to get rid of the Electoral College. She never did it. Dick Durbin, who had a bill before, said he would reintroduce it, and he didn't. In that session, after Bush v. Gore and the installation of George W. Bush, the Democrats didn't even introduce it. They didn't make it an issue. And so, they blamed the Green Party instead of the Electoral College and the winner-take-all plurality election system that splits the center and left votes and sometimes elects far-right Republicans. Okay, and I would say the odds are pretty good that the Electoral College will make the loser, Donald Trump, the loser of the popular vote, the president again. And the odds are even stronger that if that happens, they're going to blame the Green Party the Democrats are going to blame the Green Party rather than the Electoral College. So I think, there are weaknesses in the Democrats' own campaign messaging and ground game. And that will be, in the end, why they lose if they do. They're going to try to blame us, but they really need to look in the mirror. Now, I would say the only defensible reason to vote for Harris is if you're concerned about genocide. I'm going to say there's no defensible reason to vote for Harris if you're concerned about the genocide in Gaza or the ecocide of the planet. The only place where it might be defensible is in a swing state to stop Trump. And we should not downplay how bad Trump will be. I know some people, and particularly the social media I've been following this week, have been doing that. Remember, Trump has vowed revenge on his political opponents, Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. He wants to weaponize the justice system to criminalize political opposition, as well as the election administrators who won't help rig the election in his favor. He's promised to unleash violence by police, private military contractors like Eric Prince's Blackwater, which is now part of the private military company conglomerate Constellus, Constellatus. Yeah, that's not discussed much. I can't even pronounce it. I don't see how it's spelled. Constellatus, I think is how you pronounce it. Anyways, there are private military companies that could be hired, and they're private paramilitary groups, these right-wing militias. And some of them are just looking for the excuse to pull out their AR-15s and shoot. They promised to use the military against demonstrators, which they can under the old Insurrection Act, which dates back to 1807, but has not been used many times. But remember, Michael Flynn was urging Trump to do that, to steal the election, basically, and seize the election machines and so forth. He's promised to deport 10 million undocumented workers using the military, purge 50,000 civil service workers, and replace them with pro-Trump hacks. And of course, he wants to drill, baby, drill to destroy the climate, ban abortion, and his only real economic policy besides tariffs, which, as Harris said, without explaining it too well, is like a new 10 to 20% sales tax on all of us. Another tax cut for the rich. And that's just going to wreck the U.S. economy. With the tariffs, it's going to lead to higher inflation and trade wars, which will precipitate a recession. And of course, recessions hammer the poor at home and around the world the most of all. So, I think we have to recognize that our rights to organize, our political rights, will be far less threatened under Harris than Trump. But I still say we should vote and use our voice, that is our vote, and vote for Stein, for a progressive alternative to the two-party system, to stop the genocide in Gaza, for a universal public health care system, for a Green New Deal that's a serious response to the climate crisis, and many other progressive policies that the Greens stand for. So Jill had a response to the debate, and nothing she said I would disagree with, but I think she'd be better served by emphasizing the positive program of the Greens than focusing so much on what's wrong with Harris. And then Trump sometimes is an afterthought. I wish she would try to outdo Harris in ridiculing Trump's inanities and falsehoods about immigrants and eating your dogs, windmills giving you cancer, and all the other nonsense that Trump has been spouting. And I wish Jill had got a little more specific on the policies. She framed them in a system ameliorating progressive approach, a liberal approach, rather than a system changing eco-socialist approach. And I think political education is one of the purposes of running a presidential campaign. And I think we should be talking about radical system change, not just some discrete policies here. In fact, on Charlemagne the God, she said we're advocating what the progressive Democrats do, which I think we're doing more than that, or we should be. So anyway, we should be talking about capitalism being a top-down tyrannical system with endless growth that destroys the environment and exploits people built into its structure, and that we need the full economic and political democracy of an eco-socialist system so the people have the power to choose. We're going to meet everybody's needs within ecological limits. I mean, we have enough to produce what everybody needs in harmony with the environment and distribute it according to what people need as an alternative to capitalism's endless growth and the policies of the Democrats and Republicans as well. That'll benefit all of us because it'll trickle down. And it's not trickling down, and it's killing the planet. And another point I would like to have a discussion about is, Jill, like a lot of people, and I think there's some truth in this, she says the Dems contribute to the rise of the far right because they support a neoliberal economic policy. And I think that's partly true. NAFTA and the jobs lost, that hurt the Democrats' base in the Midwest. Right here in Syracuse, I mean, we had the most trade adjustment benefits that were in NAFTA because of factories leaving our area in central New York. But I would say it's not neoliberalism as much as normalizing racism. The Democrats normalizing racism. This racism has been underground, but it's always been there. And now Trump and his minions have brought it back out. Most MAGA Republicans are middle class. They're small business owners and middle managers. They're not working class people. Trump's gets some working class votes, some blue collar voter votes. But it's, you look at the data, it's more that higher income middle class strata. Most working class people that are hurt by neoliberalism still vote Democratic. Or they become non-voters or independent voters, not MAGA Republican voters. So what I'm saying is the Democrats have, the biggest way they've contributed to the rise of the right is by normalizing them, by doing this bipartisan nonsense. Trump trying to do bipartisanship with, Biden trying to do bipartisanship with the party that tried to overthrow his election. And this racism, which is deep-seated, it's a legacy of our country's origins in slavery and the genocidal dispossession of indigenous nations. It's been underground to a great degree since the Civil Rights Revolution in the 1960s. And now it's come back above ground. Trump has normalized it, and the Democrats have helped by saying that the Republicans are treating the Republicans like they're a normal party instead of smashing them politically. Now, in this dynamic, I think the good news is that the racist demographic has been declining and aging out. We know that from polling from the 1960s until now. The bad news is that the normalization of that racism is giving it new life and bringing it to a new generation of white people that, if the Trump phenomenon had not come forward, probably would have adjusted to the general trend in our society toward more tolerance, more racial tolerance and tolerance toward other marginalized groups. So what I'm saying is we should be calling out that racism, not just the neoliberalism, and shame both the Democrats and Republicans who adapt to racism instead of fighting it. I got some more comments on specific issues, but I think I'll stop there. And, I was talking military budget, healthcare, housing, Green New Deal, and Gaza. How our positions need to be more developed. I think Jill's got the right position. They're just not getting as specific as I think they could be to help educate our own people on how to fight for these issues in, our own election campaigns and our own movement activity in our communities. But before I open it up to questions, I wanted to take time to answer a question that was asked last week by Sean Young from Minneapolis. He's a friend of Butch Ware. They grew up together. He was the son of the late elected Green member of the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board. And Sean asked me in that chat during Butch's presentation and question and answer on the show was, how can the Green Party build stronger relations between the state and national Green parties? And I said, I'll give my answer this week. So that's what I'm doing. And I think this is an important question about strengthening the organizational capacities of the Green Party, because I think we're underperforming from what we could be doing. So let's start with how we can strengthen the national party so it can provide support to the state parties. We've now had over 20 years where we've been trying to support and fund the national party on the nonprofit model without, grants from big donors. And we don't want them. We want this to be a popular, mass-based and mass-supported party financially. But instead of expecting Green Party members to fund the party with regular dues, we've relied on, periodic appeals for donations. And what has that got us? It's got us an annual budget for a national party of in the range of $200,000 to $250,000 over the last decade. I mean, check out your nonprofits in your local community. Most of them have much bigger budgets than that, even those that are advocacy groups and not, charity groups. That's just enough to fund an office manager and a web manager, some organizational overhead, and some small contributions to candidates and ballot access drives. That budget is not nearly enough for a national party that's serious. It's not enough to support a staff that could get our message out and our activities out into the mass media and social media spheres, or support our organizing with organizers. So I say the first thing we need to do is reject this failed nonprofit model and adopt the mass membership party model, which was an invention of the left in the latter half of the 19th century. It was how the socialist workers movement in Europe and then in this country in the 20th century funded itself in competition with the top-down establishment parties that were funded by rich elites, landed or business-based. And in Europe, they did this because they first had to fight to win the franchise. We didn't have that so much except for Black people. So what happened in this country, except for the Socialist Party in the first 30 years of the 20th century, parties on the left have been memberless parties like the Democrats and Republicans. And without going into the whole history, we call conventions and elect delegates to the next level until, county, state, and then national. And sometimes we get people in there that don't really agree with us, like what happened to the People's Party, the Populist Party in 1896. It was Democrats who infiltrated those meetings and got delegates to the convention. They ended up cross-endorsing William Jennings Bryan, the Democratic candidate, a phony populist, and it killed the People's Party. So, that's one reason why we should have a party based on, if you're going to be a member with voting rights, you should agree to our principles and support it with your dues. And in these mass membership parties, members were organized into local branches where it was one member, one vote. To be a member with voting rights, you had to agree to the principles and pay your dues. And then the local branch memberships were represented at the state and national level, or regional, whatever the district was in a country, in proportion to the members they had at the base, the living, breathing members. So questions before the regional or national councils of the party could be debated locally, and the local members could give their representatives instructions on how to deal with that. And that's how the Green Party movement started. From 1984 to 1991, we were the committees of correspondence and the Green committees of correspondence. And then in 1991 to 2000, we had the Greens, Green Party USA. That whole organizational trend was funded by Green Party members who paid dues and were organized into locals. At our peak, we had 300 locals and I think 4,000 dues paying members. I'd have to dig into my files to see, exactly what that was. But that was enough to support a national office with paid staff and publications. Back then, we didn't have the internet. We were mailing stuff out, and that was expensive. But we had a split in the 90s. There were splitters who wanted a federation of state parties instead of a national party with, real people as members. So the members became the state parties. Like the Democrats and Republicans, they thought that's the way the big guys do it. And that split was acrimonious in the 1990s. I think it was debilitating for our organizing. It was finally resolved, without going into all the details, after the Nader campaign in 2000, and we have the party structure we now have. But what came out of that? We lost our regular funding base and our grassroots base of organized locals that were supported by the party structure. And we have representation in the National Committee and the quadrennial presidential nominating convention that is not based on one green, one vote. It's based on a complicated formula of statistical indicators of activity in states. And, these are such things as how many candidates did you run, candidates elected, votes received, ballot status or not, how many registered members have you got, and so on. But these indicators, they're not fair across states because it's hard, it's much harder in some states than others to get on the ballot and get a ballot line. Are the local elections partisan or nonpartisan? It's harder to win in a partisan race and get those votes. Does the state do party registrations or not? In 23 states, it doesn't. So the party itself has to keep a list of registered members. And this can lead to absurd results. I mean, just one example. several years ago, Texas got a big quota of delegates, and they had just disbanded because they'd lost their ballot line. They needed 3% in a statewide race, and they got 2 point something. And so they got these delegates, they didn't even exist. And then the Republicans in that state, because they didn't want just the Libertarians taking votes from the two major parties, changed that threshold to 2%. So the Greens requalified, and then they reformed. But, it'd be much easier if we just had one Green, one vote, proportionally represented from the base. So what would happen if we adopted a membership-based model? The Greens, I would say, have a hardcore base of about 500,000, judging from party registration numbers and votes in presidential elections. And compare us to the British Green Party. They have 59,000 members currently. Suppose we organize 10% of that 500,000 into a mass membership dues-paying Green Party. And suppose those members paid $80 a year like the British Greens do. 50,000 times $80 is $4 million. Let's compare it to Democratic Socialists of America. They have about 60,000 members. Their members pay $15 a month or $180 a year. That gives them a budget of about $9 million a year. The British Greens, their dues give them about a budget of $5 million in a country of 67 million. The Canadian Green Party has a budget of about $4.5 million in a country with a population of 41 million. And here we are in the United States without a dues-paying base, and we have a budget of $250,000 in a country with a population of 333 million. I think we're making a mistake here. The Green budget is 1/20th of the budgets of the Green and of the British and Canadian Green parties in a country with 5 to 8 times more people. We're just not being serious until we, start expecting our membership to pay dues. And so that's one thing. If we had a stronger Green Party, it could really help. National Party, it could really help the state parties. And with the national center, instead of 51 states trying to develop systems and staff and organizing to support locals, we could have one center that could provide that staff for the whole country instead of duplicating ourselves 51 times. And I'm counting DC as a state. I'm going to skip some of my notes here because I don't want to take up the whole hour. And I think we got a problem now is that while there may be, 500,000 people that are pretty hardcore Green voters, very few participate in the life of the party. In most places, there's not a local that they can go to. Too many of our state parties are about the size of a small local. They've got the franchise, but they're not organizing. And they're being rewarded at the national level because our representational structure is not only based on these statistical indicators, it gives every state at least 2 votes in the national committee, even if they hardly got any activity, not many more than 2 people. And you have to meet some indicators to get more votes. But what that does is skew the representation toward the states that aren't organizing. It's like the U.S. Senate or the Electoral College. And what we should really go to is one person, one vote. Have a national membership, share those dues 50-50 between the national and the state. Then the state could share their portion 50-50 between the state and the locals, something like that. And then we'd have money in our system to support our organizing. So I wrote a lot of notes about this, but I don't want to go on too long. I want to get to the state side of things. So, okay, one thing my basic point here is we should move toward a mass membership party of dues-paying members. Then we'll have a strong local that can help the state parties. In the meantime, what the state parties can do is adopt that dues-paying model themselves. Some states have, and then they can have the resources to support their locals. And, while our best locals, from what I can see, have only 10 or 20 members, we should be aiming to build locals with 100 or more members. And in small cities for sure, and in bigger cities, several locals of 100 or more. That would be, a real force in the politics of those cities. And that leads me to what I think our central strategy should be. Presidential elections are good. There are good reasons for running them, which I listed here, but I know what they are off the top of my head. One is it's a way for us to get our program out there. It's a platform. It's educational, political educational. Two, it's a way to recruit more people into the Green Party. We get some attention and people want to get involved. And three, in about 40 of the states, it has an impact on whether we have a ballot line in the next election cycle. So those are all good reasons to run for president. But I don't think we're going to have much impact on the national political debate, on the issues we really care about through presidential runs at this point, because, they are spending, over $1 billion between their own campaign funds and all the super PACs. And I think in 2020, it was like $6 billion between Trump and Biden. It'll probably be more this time. And we're raising, maybe 2 million. I think Jill's at about 1.4 or 5 million. So we're being outspent more than 1,000 to 1. And then the media, the mass media, until we go up in the polls, is not going to cover us. So what I would argue is we should recommit to building from below. We've got 150 local elected officials. In the next coming period, we should be electing thousands. There are 500,000 local offices in this country. And that can build a base of elected officials with a record, who've proven themselves that they're responsive to their constituencies, who can then move on to state legislatures. And we can run state legislatures real soon. A lot of states, those districts are not that big, and a lot of them are uncontested. So, we can be competitive, or at least inject our agenda into the debate. Because when they're non-competitive, they don't talk about issues. And in fact, even when the Democrats and Republicans are both running, they don't talk much about issues. I just got my congressional candidates, the Democrats, palm card at my door today, and it's vacuous. He don't have issues, except one, which is abortion rights. That's okay, but I know this guy. He's bad on Gaza. He's bad on climate. He's bad on political democracy. When he's a state senator, I tried to get him to deal with our draconian ballot exclusion. New York is going to be the only state in the country with only the Democratic and Republican candidates on the ballot. It's so exclusive. But he didn't have the guts to take it up. He said, I got to get the chair of the Senate Elections Committee to get behind it. Then he would get behind it. So, I'm not voting for him or the Republican. So what we should do then is, I think, focus on building from below, electing more candidates locally, being active between elections, being in the movements, being on the streets, being at the doorsteps, being in the media. So we're not just showing up at elections. People begin to know that we're there, we're consistent, we're serious. And then build it up to the point where we can run competitive and hopefully some winning races for the U.S. House. I think that's where we could have leverage in national politics. Even without electing people, we can inject our issues into those campaigns. There are plenty of opportunities, from street protests outside the headquarters of candidates to press releases to press conferences where you got a good visual, and the TV stations like that, they show up. Candidate debates, there are plenty of opportunities. And if our issues aren't being represented, which they aren't in almost every race, we can inject them even without having a candidate. But it would be stronger with a candidate. So I think, that's what I'm saying. We should build toward becoming a mass membership, dues paying party, and start that at the state level. And if you can't get your state, start at your local level. And then build the locals up to the point where we can elect a lot more people to local office, and from there go for the House. And then when we have a caucus in the House, they'll have to pay attention to our presidential ticket. And the other part of the question was, how do we build stronger relationships? I think if we had this the strategic approach shared by the national, state, and local parties of building from below, really focusing on getting our locals strong in running competitive races, we built stronger relationships based on that common approach. So, Sean, that's my best answer to your question. I hope it was good. And let's get to some questions before we run out of time. I was on for 40 minutes. All right, Chris Blankenhorn. In Illinois, we had dues starting in the 1990s, then followed the national to the nonprofit model. We returned to dues in 2019. Our member numbers dropped on paper, hurting us on the national level, but our finances are far more stable than when we relied on a small number of big donors. We have weathered challenges with no need to rely on being bailed out by a generous, affluent member, as we had under the nonprofit model. And you say your numbers dropped on paper, were they really members if they, just said, sure, I'll be in the Green Party, and you had them on a mailing list? If they weren't doing any activity, or if they were not committed enough to actually, pay a little bit of money to support this effort, were they really with us, at least at the level we need? Scout Trooper 164. I have a feeling with Trump's poor handling of the debate that he's going to have some voters who stay home. Yeah, I think some Trump supporters who don't agree with Harris on things like abortion are going to stay home instead of vote for Trump because he looks like such a buffoon. I think Trump hurt himself and lost some enthusiasm on his side. Scout Trooper 164. You know what makes me laugh, Howie? Trump said that the polls show we did great, but the polls he's talking about are from Twitter and Newsmax. Laugh my ass off. Yeah, he lies about polls. And anybody who believes his lies is a sucker. I mean, I don't know how, I guess, people that just keep talking, in fact, Trump's been quoted as saying this, the more you repeat something, the more people believe it. So, there's a sucker born every day, as one con artist said. I think that was, I forget who that was, but I think they're right. But I think, a lot of people know Trump's lying, and some of them, like your first question, I think they're getting tired of it. Amy L. Sachs. Would love to have experts on this show talking about the nuts and bolts of reparations and how to persuade elected officials that it's needed. Yeah, I actually have somebody in mind, Ron Daniels, who is chair of the National African American Reparations Commission. And I was actually thinking about getting him to write an article, or if not, do an interview where he could answer the questions rather than write a whole article, or record an interview and then transcribe and create a transcript of the questions. But maybe I should ask him to just come on this show and talk about it. There are real issues, in the reparations movement between individual cash reparations versus collective reparations to build Black economic and political power. The question of who would qualify if you have cash reparations. People who are directly descended from slaves, or everybody who's victims of slavery and discrimination. There's one group says only American U.S. slaves. If you're a descendant of a slave in Jamaica, they don't want you to get the reparations. So there's a lot of controversy there. And I think Ron, he goes back to he was the chief organizer of the first National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana in 1972. And that led to the Black Independent Political Party, which kind of dissolved into Jesse Jackson's presidential campaigns. And Ron was one of the campaign managers of those and the executive director of the Rainbow Coalition. He actually ran for president in 92 with a third party effort called the Campaign for a New Tomorrow. Didn't get much of a response. Today his base is the Institute for the Black World. So I think I'm going to take your question and ask Ron if he wants to come on and talk about reparations. Scout Trooper 164. I think I asked this last week, but what are your thoughts on tenant media being caught by the FBI taking Russian money and lying about not knowing it came from them, as well as being offered shelter? I don't know about being offered shelter, but yeah, they say they don't know where the money came from, but I don't believe that. I think they knew exactly where it was coming from. Certainly the people that own tenant media. Now, the people they paid to do these podcasts, they're saying they didn't know. I'm skeptical. But, the fact that Russia's running influence operations in this country is confirmed by those podcasters admitting that, yeah, they were, using that money for their podcast. So I think there's a lot going on that, we don't even know about in terms of, Russian influence operations. Not that they're the only country doing it. The U.S. does it in other countries. And, we should say, stop. Let us have our own elections without foreign countries interfering. Vicky Corden, here in Florida, the police knocked on people's doors to verify signatures for the amendment to vote for abortion. I think you're talking about the initiative referendum. It is voter suppression. DeSantis and his neighbors want the abortion ban. Yeah, I mean, we've had that as Greens. We saw it in North Carolina, particularly with Matthew Host's Senate campaign. I think we've seen it in this election cycle in a few states where the Democrats send their people out and ask them to remove their signatures. We had that in my campaign in Montana, and the Democrats got away with it. And basically, they were harassing people to the point where people said, "Oh, take my name off them," just to get them off their back. So this looks like the same thing. They're trying to prevent the people of Florida from voting on the question of abortion. And it's pretty clear they're going to vote for abortion rights. And that's why DeSantis and his people don't want there to even be a vote. Beloved community, Greens should avoid any suggestion of safe states or voting for Harris to stop Trump. We should only advocate voting for our own party's candidates. Yeah, I agree with that. I would just say that we have to recognize that some people that we will work with going forward on issues like Medicare for All, Green New Deal, stopping arms to Israel, they're going to say, I'm voting to stop Trump. And so we shouldn't burn bridges to those people. That's all I'm saying. Because we need to build we got to unite the many to defeat the few. And so we should always leave communication channels and opportunity to work together outside of the election going forward. And I would say for the Greens, there are no safe states. Every state is a battleground state. If you're in Pennsylvania fighting fracking, you don't have an option except the Green Party. In a lot of states, they suppress us getting on the ballot, whether they're safe states or battleground states. Our issues, it's a battleground. It's a battle to get our issues on the table and debated. And we know a lot of our policies are very popular. So, that's very frustrating. So I always kind of laugh at the safe states moniker, because for us, there are no safe states. We got a battle in every state. Scout Trooper 164, any views so far on Ukraine trying to get permission from U.S. and U.K. to finally strike military targets? Might be still ongoing, but whatever. Yeah, we've had this policy from Biden of managed escalation, I guess is what they call it. And so we're always late in providing Ukraine with what they ask for, whether it's Patriot missile defense systems, which if we had provided them at the beginning of the war like Ukraine was asking for, they could have prevented a lot of the damage to their energy infrastructure. Those are defensive weapons. And we were hesitant to provide them. We were hesitant to provide them Abrams tanks or the F-16 jets or the HIMARS artillery. And by the time we provided, they're not as effective as they could have been. That's true now with the ATACMS longer range missiles that are being debated now. And, you know, it's striking military targets in Russia, and particularly the air bases from which they launched these glide bombs, which are massive 1,000 to 2,000 bombs. They glide with a GPS system, but they're not that accurate, but they're massively destructive. You know, they're not targeting narrowly military targets, although they're devastating against Ukrainian military positions. And so, you know, what the U.S. is telling Ukraine to do is rather than, you know, go after the archer, they're telling them to shoot down the arrows once they're shot, which is hard to do. So Ukraine wants to hit the air bases from which these glide bombs are launched, as well as cruise missiles, and some of the military production systems within the range of the ATACMS. The U.S. has said you can't strike any Russian military targets more than, I think it's like 30 miles inside on the Russian side, and only in Belgrade and Kursk oblasts, which are just on the other side of the Kharkiv oblast that Russia invaded a couple months ago. So, you know, U.S. is making Ukraine fight with one hand behind its back. I mean, either you say, as some people say, Ukraine's only getting enough not to lose the war. And they're saying, we'll do that as long as it takes. And Ukrainians are saying, you know, give us whatever it takes to win the war. That's not to say that their military struggle is easy. A lot of people, and you see this, there was a Common Dreams column from Ida Chavez from Center for International Policy saying, you know, that letter from the Progressive Caucus, which it withdrew, saying U.S. should encourage negotiations with Russia. And that was, they pulled it back because at that time, Ukraine was gaining a lot of land. She said, you know, we missed an opportunity and we should, you know, start negotiating now. But the implication is, in the context is, negotiate a ceasefire on the current lines, front lines, which means Russia gets the land it's taken. Would she or people who are saying that tell the Palestinians, okay, in the interest of peace, because you can't beat the Israelis militarily, you should accept the settlements on the West Bank, the occupation of Gaza, and just call it a peace settlement where the battle lines are now? You know, they aren't asking the Palestinians to do that, but they're asking the Ukrainians to do that. I would say it's up to the Ukrainians to decide, you know, what they're willing to fight for, because they have the right to self-defense and self-determination, and that's what we should support. So I don't know what the outcome is. The news I see is the new Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, is saying the permission should be granted. And for the UK, that's some of their cruise missiles. But Biden administration's holding back. And for what I read, Jake Sullivan is the one holding back the most. He's what's his position? National Security Advisor, I guess. So, you know, we'll have to see. We should get some kind of answer on that pretty soon. Jack Lucas, the dispute with AOC has turned into a petty battle for the last word and represents bad strategy. If we want a breakthrough, we'll have to work with and push left-wing Democrats like her. Calling her a shit lib or the like because of a difference on presidential elections is alienating. I agree with you, Jack. It's one thing to correct AOC when she says we don't run down ballot candidates when we've won 1,500 elections and currently have 150 people in office. We should correct her on that. But I think, denouncing her with, whatever, words and saying she's a sellout and blah, blah, blah. I think we should leave the door open. That, if you read that article that we linked to earlier, that's what I say at the end. And I say, and I'm speaking for myself, from the Green side, the door is open. I saw today something I had not known before. I've written articles, I think I put it in this article on AOC's attack on Jill Stein, that she took the Green New Deal from the Greens in New York, and we know that. And I've been saying her campaign manager, V.G. Ramos, was the campaign manager for a Green candidate who ran on a Green New Deal for New York City Council in 2017, a guy named Jabari Brisport. And what I saw today was her holding a leaflet, one of Jabari's leaflets. So she was out canvassing for a Green candidate in 2017, which I didn't know. So she knew about the Green New Deal directly, not just through V.G. Ramos. But I still say, she's never given us credit for the Green New Deal. That's not so important. But working with us, collaborating with us would be a step forward. Plus, she watered it down, pretty radically. For example, in our Green New Deal, we've been calling for a ban on fracking. That was the centerpiece of my Green New Deal in 2010. And it's absent from the non-binding Green New Deal resolution that she and Ed Markey introduced to Congress. It abandoned the phase out of nuclear power as renewables come online. In fact, she's open to nuclear power. I've seen some statements from her. She, in the resolution there, Green New Deal resolution, eliminated the deep cuts to military spending to help fund the Green New Deal. Extended the deadline 20 years from 2030 to 2050 for what they call net zero. We were calling real zero. Net zero means you can keep burning fossil fuels if you capture it and sequester it, which is a unprofitable and hazardous process. So I'm leaving the door open. In fact, you read that article I've called her out twice in Ralph Nader's Capitol Hill Citizen on electoral reform, ranked choice voting, and proportional representation, and on National Health Service, going beyond Medicare for All, a national health insurance program, to a national health service which socializes and democratizes the healthcare delivery system as well. And in fact, she said to applause at a gathering of nurses and veterans that actually she was explaining that the Medicare for All national health insurance program wouldn't take away the public delivery system that the VA has. But then she said something like, if I had my way, we'd have VA for all, Veterans Administration or Veterans Health Administration for all. So I said in that article, you can take the first step toward that by reintroducing the bill Ron Dellums carried from 1977 to 1997, calling for a national health service that was democratically controlled from the bottom up by boards elected at the local level by healthcare workers and the community members, 1/3 workers, 2/3 community, and then federating up at 3 levels that corresponded to larger levels of healthcare administration. Local level would be the community health clinic, and every community of 25 to 50,000 would have it, which would drive healthcare in the underserved communities. Next level was the community hospital. Next level was the medical center, where you do a lot of research. You may have a medical school. And the final level was national. And so the local boards would federate at those levels to administer the whole system from the bottom up. And that's the kind of stuff that I would like to have a working relationship with those progressives in Congress. Unfortunately, people like AOC and Bernie Sanders won't give us the time of day. They avoid us. Ralph Nader has not got a response from Bernie Sanders since he got into the House of Representatives, in 1991. And the progressives in the Democratic Party should realize that their hand is strengthened when the independent left is strong, because then they can go to the corporate Democrats and say, hey, we're going to lose votes to these people and seats to these people if we don't adopt things like some kind of Medicare for all. But they seem to regard us, at least AOC has in this recent stuff, as we're their biggest enemies, not the fact that, Harris could co-opt whatever vote the Greens are getting by saying we're going to have arms embargo on Israel till the genocide stops, and we're going to talk about universal health care through a public system. Jill can say, steal my votes. You're welcome, by adopting our policies. In any case, I'm just saying that, as I said in answer to an earlier question, we got to maintain relations with progressives who, in the election, think they got to vote defensively for the Democrats. I don't agree, but on that vote. But after the election, if we're fighting together, say we're in Pennsylvania for a ban on fracking, our differences on electoral strategy should not stop us working together for that ban on fracking. There it is. Jack Lucas or Chris found that. Yeah. Now I wish I could get to see the small print. I wonder if it says Green New Deal on there, because Jabari was campaigning on that. And the next year, AOC had it on her website when she talked about climate policy. So, she knows damn well where she got the Green New Deal from. In fact, I'm thinking that was on Hard Lens Media. That's where I saw it too. I'm going to write to Jordan Carlton, I think his name is, and ask him for the original source of that. That was, after all these years, news to me. Okay, so that's an hour. I don't have a guest scheduled for next week. I do have one for September 28th. It's a journalist that I've worked with in the Ukraine Solidarity Committee, who's been in Ukraine the last couple of months. He's just got back, and he will share with us what he saw and heard there. That's September 28th. And I will ask Ron Daniels if he wants to come on and talk about reparations. And otherwise, whatever happens, we'll be here next week at 3 o'clock and talk about what's going on. And I will try to keep my remarks shorter. There was a lot with the debate to talk about, and the issues around Jill Stein, and the question that Sean Young had asked that I wanted to answer. And I didn't even get through all my notes. I probably wrote enough for an hour-long talk, but I tried to cut it short so we get some of these questions. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.